Okay, good, good, good. All right, let's get started. So, this very first poem, all the poems today are pretty short. I don't think they're super difficult. So, what is this about? This is called Sympathy by poet Lawrence Dunbar. This actually responds to a different poem. Anyone remember that poem by Maya Angelou? Maybe some of our students remember it about the caged bird and the free bird. Anyone remember that? So some of my students previously will have done a poem like this. This is actually kind of a poem in response. And this is obviously one big what? This whole poem is a long, extended what?
Metaphor.
Metaphor. Good. Put up your hand though next time instead of unmuting yourself, okay? There's clearly one extended metaphor, okay? Metaphor for, potentially people who are, in oppressed situations, right? So specifically, and you didn't have to know this 100% because you couldn't have known it, but the historical context for this poem, it's about, the African American civil rights movement, okay? So obviously, African Americans suffered a lot of racism in the 20th century. And this is from basically someone who's looking in on that situation from the outside and responding to it. Okay, which of the following best captures the central idea of the poem? Now, clearly, hopefully, a lot of you figured out this is a bit more than just about a bird, right? It's probably a bit more than, just like Ozymandias, it's probably a bit more than just about a statue. This poem is a bit more than just about a bird. And I think that, if you figure that out, then you would have been able to answer this first question, because a lot of these answers make the whole poem sound like it's just about a bird, but it's clearly not just about a bird. It's clearly something a little bit broader than that. So question one, which of the following best captures the central idea of the poem? Birds are only happy when they're free. That makes it seem like the whole poem's about a bird. It can't be that. No creature can be happy when denied freedom. Okay, so that makes it a little bit broader. That looks pretty good. Cages make creatures give up on life. That's also a bit too specific. That's almost about cages. And freedom is not possible for everyone. Well, probably not, right? It's not saying some people can be free and other people can't be. Only some people get to be free. That's a bit of a cruel statement. It's clearly not what the poem's about. So B is the right answer here. All right, question two. The first stanza of the poem creates the idea of what? Let's read the first stanza quickly together. I know what the caged bird feels, alas, when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, when the wind stirs soft through the springing grass, and the river flows like a stream of glass, when the first bird sings and the first bud opes. Now, opes. Now, why did the poet use the word opes here? Some of you said, shouldn't it be opens? Well, clearly, the word is opes because they're trying to rhyme with the word slopes. And opes is kind of an old-fashioned way of saying opens. So it does mean open, but clearly it's, they're doing it deliberately because of this rhyming scheme, okay? So it's not a misspelling or a typo there. First bud opes, and the faint perfume from its chalice steals, I know what the caged bird feels. So basically the author is kind of describing, look at this wonderful nature outside, these beautiful scenes while the caged bird is trapped in its cage. So which one of these options is the best? Missing the experiences of the world because of capture. That already looks pretty good. A desire to experience life without barriers. That seems maybe a bit too far, right? Experience life without barriers. So there should be no laws. There should be no barriers. I think that's maybe a stretch. The beauty of the world is too simplistic. Okay, that's only one half of kind of what that first thing is. And a desire to fly away from the problems of the world is completely wrong because the caged bird can't fly away. A is the right answer here. Okay, the cruel bars in line 9 reinforce the idea of the bird's what? So, I know why the caged bird beats his wing till its blood is red on the cruel bars. So bars, obviously bars of this cage. Why are they described as cruel? Well, because the bird is trapped. It's cruel to keep an animal in a cage. So which one of these options is the best? Containment is inhumane. Okay, so that's pretty broad. That could work. Cage is not large enough for the animal. Okay, maybe, right? But I think that would be a misunderstanding, right? So the bird is not beating its wing on its cage because it's too small and the bird is too big. Okay, it's beating its wing on the cage because it wants to escape. So I don't think it's B. A bird's determination is bigger than its cage, that's a little bit abstract. Doesn't really make that much sense. And the cage is harming the animal. Yes, possibly as well. I think the better answer here is A, though, right? Because A is like the big picture idea, right? No one should be trapped. No creature should be trapped. It's inhumane to keep something in a cage, right? So A seems correct there. 4, the speaker indicates that the caged bird beats his wings in order to what? Containment means put something in a container, Zoe. Okay, so to keep something contained. Okay, the speaker indicates the caged bird beats his wings in order to A, attempt escape, train for the day when he will escape, release the frustration of captivity, or create pain for himself. Now, clearly, it's not going to be D, right? That doesn't make any sense, right? So the caged bird beats his wing in order to hurt himself. Now, it's probably also not A or B. And the reason for that is, right, a bird can't escape a cage by hitting the cage from the inside with its wing, right? But he says, I know why the caged bird beats his wing till its blood is red on the cruel bars, because he must fly back to his perch at cling when he fain would be on the boa swing. He'd rather be on a tree, but he has to fly back to the perch on the cage. So it suggests that the caged bird is angry that it's trapped, because it knows it wants to be out there in nature on a tree, but it's forced to stay in this cage. So the best option here, I think, is C, release the frustration of captivity. Captivity means the state of being captured. Winston, 2 was A. Question 5, the speaker indicates the caged bird sings in order to what? So, I know why the caged bird sings when his wing is bruised. It is not a carol or joy or glee. So it's not singing a happy tune, but a prayer that he sends from its heart's deep core, a plea that upward to heaven he flings, right? So it's a prayer to be free, right? It's a desire to be free. So what is it then? Okay, it's clearly not A or B, right? They would be wrong. It's neither. That's not what the poem says. So is it to plead to be released or to demand freedom from the world? I think D is a bit too dramatic, right? It's a little bit weird. Demand freedom from the world. It doesn't really make any sense. But a plea to be released, begging, right? To God or someone to free him, I think that's more appropriate, C. The word feign in line 11 most likely means what? So if you understood what this line meant, you should be able to figure out pretty quickly. So he must fly back to his perch and cling. So the bird has to fly back to the bar in his cage to sit. When he fain would be on the boa swing, he'd much rather be sitting on a branch of a tree. So feign must mean something like, he would much rather be doing it, right? That he would love to do something like that. So which one here means, he would much rather be doing it, he would like doing it. Okay, feign, out of the options here, probably pleasurably, right? The bird would much rather be sitting on the boa swing. A boa obviously meaning the branch of a tree, okay, if you didn't know that. A large branch on a tree. And finally, lines 9 and 10 most likely represent what? Okay, 9 and 10 would be here. Right, same lines we just read. Right, these things. Till his blood is red on the cruel bars, for he must fly back to his perch and cling. So basically, right, these represent when the bird is feeling it's most angry, it's most trapped. So out of the options that are available, I think A, the most challenging times in life, looks pretty good. Bird's clearly not excited to be in the cage, doesn't make any sense. Also doesn't have anything to do with the bird's strength, right? Whether the bird is strong or weak, it can't get out of a cage, right? It's not as if you have some sort of super muscular bird that can just bust out of a cage in one hit. Doesn't really make any sense, right? So it's got nothing to do with the strength of the bird. So A looks like it's the only good option there. All right, very quickly, let's look at the second poem, Blindness. This poem's very interesting, okay, because it describes a person that slowly goes blind, a person that develops blindness over their lifetime. And how do we know that? Because it describes how the darkness slowly takes over, right, until they become blind. Now, does anyone notice anything very unusual about this poem? What's unusual about this poem, guys? Zoe?
That, like, the sentence structure is really weird.
Good. The sentence structure is quite strange, right? It's not written in stanzas like this. Okay, it doesn't have any rhyme scheme or anything like that. It's written in these, sometimes a sentence only has, one or two words. We're going to talk about this tomorrow when we talk about form. Okay, we're going to talk about form. But for now, clearly some of you have noticed there's something a bit weird about this poem. We're going to get into more depth about that tomorrow, okay? Put your hands down, by the way, if you have nothing to say, just because it helps me see when people actually have questions. So Oliver and Jaden, if you have nothing to add. Question 1. What literary technique is used to compare the distant sun to the dog? Okay, we literally learnt about all of these today, right? So here it's talking about the dog, right? The image of the yellow dog blurs slightly, fuzzing around the edges, and then it streams into the body of dog until each strand becomes one yellow brick, and all I can see is a distant sun running away from me, right? Distant sun running away from me. Now, generally speaking, right, some of you may have put personification, but that's not necessarily true, right? Because when you compare a distant sun to a dog, you're not giving the sun human qualities. So remember, calling something personification is not the same as giving it any kind of movement whatsoever. It's giving something human qualities. That's what makes it human, right? That's what makes it actually, personification. So personification isn't right here. Now, if it's not personification, we don't see any simile. It's clearly not comparing something to a concept. Well, that's just good old-fashioned metaphor, right? So when you compare a sun to a dog, that's not personification. Everyone sort of see what I mean? Yeah, because you're not comparing something to human beings, right? Personification, making something a person. That's literally what it says. So why is the word see in italics? Now, I think for you it was in italics, right? On the online version, I think it was this one that was in italics. Is that correct? Because on my version it isn't. I think it was this C, right? So yeah. So how can you see darkness? Well, clearly, what is the author trying to emphasize here? The author's trying to emphasize there's a bit of irony in the phrase "see darkness." Do we agree? Because darkness is obviously not seeing, not being able to see at all. So how can you see darkness? Well, clearly the author's emphasizing the contradiction in that statement, right? Darkness is not being able to see. But suddenly the author says, I see darkness, being blind. There's a bit of irony there. There's some sort of contradiction there, right? B, C, and D, I think, go a little bit too far. For example, C, change in one's routine. I don't know how putting C in italics can emphasize that sort of thing. Okay, what is the significance of the phrase, you crawl around like a babe for the first time? So basically, this is sort of like, when someone does become blind, they're almost like they lose all the sense of reference that they had before with the world, right? People who develop blindness later in life find it very challenging because you used to navigate the world by sight and you're no longer able to. So you kind of feel like a baby again. You're not literally crawling around like a baby though, right? So I think, once again, you crawl around like a babe for the first time, that would be a simile, right? Because it's not literally saying, people who go blind, they have to start going on their hands and knees and crawling, right? That would be a bit ridiculous. But clearly, okay, I think the best answer here, okay, is C, right? Because like a baby, you kind of have to relearn. Everything's new to you. You used to be able to navigate through vision. Now you can't anymore. So you're very vulnerable like a baby. Crawling around like a baby, right, is not literal. All right, question 4. What does the darkness represent in this poem? Hopefully people actually got this, because if you understood the poem at all, you should be able to get this question. The darkness obviously represents blindness, right? There's hopefully nothing confusing about that. Question 5. What best describes the imagery, the rhythm and structure of the poem evoke? right? So the rhythm and the structure, that's what we just talked about, didn't we? Right? The rhythm and the structure of the poem. It's very disjointed. The lines are really short. It's kind of all over the place, right? It's kind of like, the darkness, right? When you're in the dark, what happens? You can't really see. Everything is only, you can only touch things. You can only see little parts of things. You can't see everything. So the rhythm and the structure of the poem, I think the one that fits the theme the best is probably A, right? Darkness slowly spreading and taking over. Kind of fits the theme of the poem as well. Now, some of you probably put B, stumbling around and being confused in the dark. Doesn't really make sense because the poem is not about stumbling around and being confused, right? It's about someone slowly losing their sight. Zoe, can you sit properly? Sorry. This is very disturbing to see a giant foot in your camera a lot of the time, okay? All right, stumbling around, being confused in the dark doesn't really make a lot of sense. A sudden lack of all light doesn't make sense because that would indicate, a sudden change. There isn't one of those. And a warm and comforting darkness like dusk. I don't think this poem is warm and comforting at all. So A. What was the author's intention, most likely intention, when writing this poem? Well, clearly they're trying to show you, right, what going blind actually feels like for the person that's going blind. Okay? Now, there's two options here. A and D that kind of reveal that, right? So to show the pain of blind people go through when losing their sight, or to depict the slow and uncertain descent into blindness in an empathetic manner. Now, what do we think is better? Is it pain or is it slow and uncertainty? I think the better answer is probably D here, right? Slow and uncertain, right? This gradual descent into blindness. Pain would suggest more anger, more sadness, more hurt. That's not really present here in the poem. So I think D is the best answer here. Okay, I know we're going through this very quickly. I'll leave some more time for answers in the next lesson. I'll also extend the break a little bit, okay? All right, question 3 is very easy. Poem 3 is very easy. A bird came down, right? Very straightforward poem. It's almost basically a descriptive poem. So what's a descriptive poem? It's a poem that just describes what the title is. And there is almost no real, huge overarching metaphor in this poem like in the first two. Everyone agree? Yeah, it's kind of just a depiction of nature, right? So what was the author's intention when writing this poem? So clearly here we can see, the bird came down, he ate a worm, he drank some dew, he let a beetle pass, and then, he leapt off, whatever. So basically it's just, a description of a bird, right? And this description of the environment that they walk through and, how beautiful this bird's movements were and so on. Now, there are two possible answers that could be correct. It could be A or it could be C, right? Now, A, I think, is a bit too simplistic, right? A just says, to recount an interesting bird they saw one morning. Now, if they wanted to write a recount, they probably wouldn't write it in poetry form, yeah? It's a bit too simplistic. That's like saying, I wrote this poem about a bird because I saw a bird, right? Clearly, the poem is still, very descriptive. It's trying to emphasize the beauty. I think the better answer here would be C, okay? Now, the reason why it's not something like D, to comment on the intricate interactions between different animals, is there's not really a lot of intricate interactions. Are there intricate interactions? It eats a worm and it lets a beetle walk by. Intricate means very complex. They don't seem like complex interactions to me, right? All right, what is compared to the bird's eyes? That's really simple, right? It literally says here very directly, they look like frightened beads. So what's compared to the bird's eyes? Beads. Now, clashless, very interesting, right? Some of you may have thought this is a typo. It is a typo, kind of, because it's a word that's been made up. It's actually a word made up by the author of this poem. Now you're thinking to yourself, oh, these poets are really, really getting on my nerve, right? Not only do they use metaphor, they make up words that don't exist, and they expect us to figure out what the meaning is. Yes, unfortunately, that is sometimes the case, right? So this is a word that's been made up. It doesn't really exist in the English language. But what does it sound like? Now, plash kind of sounds like, and I know we haven't talked about this yet explicitly, but it kind of sounds like what? Eason?
Splash.
Splash? It kind of sounds like, anyway, regardless of what it is, it's probably like an onomatopoeia, right? We all know what an onomatopoeia is, like moo or bang or boom or whatever, right? So plash sounds like, a splash. It sounds like splash. So this probably means something like, let's say splashless, right? So they leap splashless as they swim, right? Probably just means that they're swimming very silently, very well, right? Without splashing around, without making a lot of noise. Something that swims very silently and well without making a lot of noise is a very skillful swimmer. So out of these words, deft looks pretty good, right? Because deft means skillful, quick, nimble, agile, those kinds of words. So yes, plashless, I agree, is not an English word. Okay, it's a word that the poet has made up. But we can tell, right, from the context of the poem what it could possibly mean. Yes, Blake?
What does sophisticated mean?
Sophisticated means complex. Okay, complicated. Very advanced, something like that. All right, what word is used differently to the others in the poem? Okay, so this is kind of interesting because we're going to have to filter through all the options. So firstly, let's look at the word butterflies. 2 silver for a slim, or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim, okay? Oars, like oars, so then oars divide the ocean. So noon, we already saw noon. And like beads, right? Now, which one of these is different from the others? Now, 3 of those form parts of what? Jasper?
Maybe movement.
No. I think something more direct. Patrick?
Metaphors?
Yeah, 3 of them form parts of metaphors. One of them's a simile, but we know that a simile is also a metaphor, right? So, for example, butterflies, right? It's directly compared, right? Beads is directly used as a comparison. Oars is directly used as a comparison. But banks of noon, that describes the butterflies. That doesn't describe the birds, right? So noon here is not part of the direct comparison, right? Because the comparison is made to the butterfly. Off banks of noon, leap plashless as they swim. So noon here is not being used in a metaphor directly to compared to the bird. So noon is the one that's the odd one out, I would say. Olivia?
What does noon mean?
Noon is midday. Like
Okay.
noon. Like 12 p.m. Okay? What poetic technique is used in the second stanza? Well, and then he drank a dew from a convenient grass and then hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. Which one of these works? Now, we haven't talked about this yet, so this is a bit of advanced knowledge to test if you have any. Now, clearly there's no simile or personification. Is there alliteration? Not really. But there is enjambment, right? So the right answer is A. So what's enjambment? Enjambment is where a line is broken at a place which is not grammatically convenient, right? So he drank a dew from a convenient grass, right? So that is not a full sentence, right? So you break the line in the middle of a phrase. That's what enjambment is, okay? Stephanie?
You're not sharing your screen anymore.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. That's what enjambment is, when you break the phrase in the middle of a line. Question 6. What does the rhythm of the poem as a whole reflect? Well, clearly, it's about the bird going here, and then he glanced around, and he did this, and then he leapt off. It's clearly just the movements of the bird, right? As it navigates its environment, make sure it's safe, and so on. 7. And ate the fellow raw suggests what? Well, the emphasis there is the fact that the bird ate the worm raw. It's not cooking the worm, right? It's not preparing it, seasoning it, right? Adding some tomato sauce, right? Because obviously the emphasis is on the word raw. And obviously we know that wild animals, they just eat things raw, right? They just eat other animals. So I think the emphasis here is on the wildness of the animal, which means I think the best answer here is A, right? The survival instincts of wild animals, right? They don't have the same kind of demands as us. And finally, question 8, the writer refers to butterflies in the last stanza, most likely to what? Now, there's a couple of answers here that are possible. So, rode him softer home than always divided ocean, or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. So clearly, the author is kind of comparing the birds unrolling of the feathers and flying off to butterflies. Now, it could be A, how elegantly the bird was able to fly, but elegantly suggests a kind of beauty. And these words don't say anything of beauty, right? They say something of skill. They say something of like deftness, agility, but they don't say anything of elegance. Elegance is a bit of a different word, right? It's like very showy, very beautiful. Not quite sure it's A. Fragility of life, not really relevant. Reveal the beauty and sophistication present in all life. I think it's a bit of a stretch. If you compare a bird to a butterfly, that doesn't mean everything is the same. But D looks pretty good, right? Because D is like saying, well, a bird is unrolling its wings much like a butterfly unfurls its feathers. So I think the best answer here is probably D, right? And finally, poem 4. Sorry, we're really rushing through things, but we're like 20 minutes over time now. I promise I'll give you a bit of a longer break. So you get about 15 minutes. Okay, so Digging by Seamus Heaney. This is a pretty straightforward poem, but it's obviously, the author makes a very, very clear metaphor, right? A metaphor, a comparison between a pen and a shovel. Do we agree? Right? Where Seamus Heaney, the poet, sees his shovel, his grandfather's shovel, like his own pen, right? And what does he describe here? He describes how his grandfather was planting and picking potatoes, as his father did with his shovel, to make a living. But Seamus is a poet, and he thinks, well, my pen is like a shovel because I also make a living with it. Similarly, in the first stanza, emphasizes what? Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests snug as a gun. Now, that's not saying that his pen is as dangerous as a gun, or that it can shoot bullets or something, right? But a gun is clearly a very dangerous, important object. You got to treat it with respect. That's why it's snug, right? You hold it very tightly. So I think the emphasis here is on the importance, right? Not the fact that, somehow you can kill someone with a pen or something like that. Okay? It's about holding it very tightly because it's important. The title of the poem pertains to what? Digging. Now, digging appears to be referring to the shovel, but we know by the final stanza, he says, between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, I'll dig with it. So it's obviously saying digging is a sort of a metaphor for making your own living, right? Making money with a tool. Whether that tool is a shovel to dig up potatoes or that tool is a pen to write poetry with. So I think the better answer here is not the act of digging potatoes, but it's B, right? Because both the author and his father, they see themselves as using their tools to dig. Seamus uses his pen to dig up new poems, to write new words. Eason?
What was question 8 for
D.
for
Okay,
D?
which of the D. Which of the following items serves as an extended metaphor? Well, this whole thing is an extended metaphor because it compares a shovel to a pen, a shovel to the act of writing poetry. The only right answer here would be A, the spade. Spade is another word for shovel. Okay. The line that contains alliteration from the following is what? So, which one of these contains alliteration? Now, some of you might be thinking, none of these lines contain alliteration. Well, here we have spade sinks and gravelly ground, right? That's the only one where that can happen. We're going to talk about alliteration this afternoon after our break, okay? Give you a few rules of alliteration. What is the similarity between writing and digging in this poem? Now, both of these people, both Seamus and his grandfather and father, they see themselves as, doing a profession, right? Using their tools to make a life for themselves. Now, obviously, writing poems does not require physical labor. Neither does any of, C and D really relevant. But B looks good, right? Because B is about, making a living, doing something important. And finally, the word that best describes the speaker's feelings about his father and grandfather would be probably proud, right? Because he says there, right? He says over and over again, right? How proud he is. By God, the old man could handle a spade. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man in the area, right? He did this over and over again. And I can't follow them. I'm not like them. I can't be as good as them as digging. But I've got a pen and I'm going to dig with it. So he clearly wants to follow in their footsteps, but in a different way. And that's why the right answer there is A, proud. Okay, sorry for running almost half an hour over time. Take a quick break now. I'll see you back here at 3:15, okay? So that gives you about 18 minutes. All right, thanks, everyone. If you have any missing questions, I'll answer them at the start of the afternoon session.
Is it the same link?
Yes, don't leave the meeting. Just stay in here. It's the same meeting link.
对，那现在是 break 了，是不是 ？Doris， 现在是 break 了，快走快走 ，Let's go。有人说话吗 ？Doris。
I can see you. Okay, just
什么
mute.
？Is that a break?
Yes,